You're listening to the Team Stripes Podcast, the podcast for hockey referees. Each show, we discuss the world of officiating and find out that not everything is black and white.
So hey folks, we are back here with another episode of the Team Stripes Podcast. We are really lucky to have a fellow Maritimer on the program today, and his name is Matt Smith. Matt, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Matt is, like I was mentioning, from the Maritimes. I am from New Brunswick, and he's from Nova Scotia. So I don't know how it worked out, but we just kind of found each other here in Ottawa, and so he is one of our first guests here on the show. And Matt, why don't you just tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you kind of got set up in Ottawa?
All right. Well, my name's Matt. I'm from Nova Scotia, Middleton, Nova Scotia to be exact. I came to Ottawa for university. I'm attending Carleton in my second year, taking international business.
So it's kind of like similar to me, actually, I guess. So you went to high school out in Nova Scotia.
Yep.
What made you want to come out here?
I'm from a town of 2,000, not very big town at all, and I'm a city boy at heart, so the country was not for me, and I wanted to get away from home and expand my horizons a little bit.
Why'd you settle in Ottawa? Just
Toronto, a little bit too big to start off. Gonna start off small and then work your way into it.
That's kind of the same reason that I wanted to get away too, and it's funny, like when you say you're from, like, I'm from Moncton, which is like the big city, New Brunswick, but then you tell people here you're from a city with 100,000 people, and you think it's big, and they kind of laugh at you and think it's not so big. But anyways, so yeah, Matt, it's great to have you here. And so, like, how's it been? Like, so you obviously how did you get involved with refereeing? Like, I'm assuming you started probably a little while ago in Nova Scotia. What was that? Tell me a little bit about that.
I did. I started when I was 12. It just happened to be good timing for me because my dad is also a referee, and he got me hooked up with my RIC back home, Mike Hobbolt, and I was able and fortunate enough to start at that early age, and I've just gone with it since.
So were you playing too, or were you always drawn to the referee side?
I was playing up until the age of 14, but when I first started, I was still playing hockey, so I had to balance the two, and then sort of lucky, sort of not lucky at the same time. I ended up suffering a second concussion during a game, so that was the end of my playing career there, and then officiating took over my life for the most part. Okay,
so when you first got into officiating, was that something you kind of knew from the first game you did that it's something you wanted to pursue, or was it kind of something you were just sort of, it was a summer, like a job on the side? What was kind of your mindset getting into it?
I think a lot of younger kids who start officiating, you're in it for a little bit of extra pocket change, something like to have money to go with your friends on the weekends, things like that. But once I started getting into it, it was something that I really enjoyed, and I have no regrets at starting officiating.
Yeah, so obviously you said your dad is he still an official, or was he?
He is, yeah. My dad's still officiating. I was lucky enough to referee a couple games with him when I was home on my reading week a couple weeks ago, so still very fortunate to be doing that, and I'm sure he's always happy to have me home and refereeing with him too.
So did he kind of push you towards the referee side pretty young?
I wouldn't say so. I say it was more of me going to the rink and being a rink rat, watching him referee, that kind of rubbed off on me a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, no, it's cool. It's like my dad was a player, and I never really had an inkling for officiating until I finished playing. So it's cool talking to guys like, whose parents have refereed, and it's kind of something that you're able to pick up from them, like learn little things here and there. Like, is there certain things that you remember learning from him as you kind of progressed? Or?
Well, I think he was kind of like the backbone of how I got my rule knowledge. I would always come home from a game and I'd be like, "Oh, Dad, what do you think about this rule? I made this call. Is this the right call?" Little things like that. And it kind of helped me out having my own rule book that I didn't have to go and look up. I just had to ask him. So it helped me out for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I could see how it's definitely like a beneficial asset to have. So you started pretty young. What were the first few years like? What kind of hockey were you doing?
So I was thrown into my fire the first game. An official didn't show up, and it was an Adam B. It was supposed to be 3-man system, ended up working 2-man, so I was lucky enough my dad was home. He drove me to the rink. He's like, okay, I'm going to go out on the ice with you. You're just going to shadow me the whole game. And the biggest thing I remember from that game is every time the goalie made a save, I would always wash it out. And I don't know why. It was just one of those things that I would always do. And my dad's like, oh, you don't have to do that. I was like, okay. So, like, I slowly got into it. But throughout my first 2 or 3 years, it was a lot of learning, a lot of younger hockey, novice Adam. And but other than that, since then, it's been taking off, and I've been going places with my officiating. For sure.
So did you find when you got into officiating, you were pretty comfortable as you started out, or what, what was that like?
I'd say I was very timid at the start, just like anybody would imagine. You have people yelling at you, but once you get to a point where you know what you're doing, you understand the rules, and you've done a certain level for a long time, you get a certain comfort in what you know what to do, and your rule knowledge just expands. You're always learning something new, no matter what game you're doing. If it's novice, you're improving your skating. If it's midget AAA, it could be a random situation that happens. It's always something that pops up, and it's good. Like, even as older guys move along, you're always learning something.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of that, like, one thing I remember when I was first starting out was that if a coach was yelling at me, I would have no idea how to react. I got so nervous at that. Is that something that is that a personality trait that you have that you can deal with that, or how has that been kind of growing through that?
Definitely mentally tough. You have to be mentally tough to be an official, and I have a brother at home, so I was able to form a little bit of a thick skin at a young age to tolerate that. So it transferred to me on the ice, and it's helped me a long way since I started.
So obviously you've come a long way. So what kind of levels have you been getting into in the last few years, and kind of where do you see yourself kind of moving from here?
So basically, in my grade 12 year, which was 2015-2016, I was selected to work the Pee Wee AAA Atlantic Championships back home. And for those of you who aren't from the Maritimes, it's a big Hockey Canada sanctioned event. I was very fortunate to be chosen for that by my RIC. And I worked all the way through the tournament through like a Thursday to Sunday schedule, and was selected to work the gold medal game. So through that, I've just prospered since. The following season, I was chosen to work Bantam AAA with the Nova Scotia Major Bantam Hockey League. And since then, it's been going. Now I'm working midget, and I get to work midget AAA at certain points of the year. So I'm very fortunate to have the opportunities that have come my way.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. Like so when you get selected for these sort of tournaments, even when you're younger, is that something that's a surprise to you? Is that something that you kind of work towards? I mean,
well, the way that it happened, it was pretty funny because I was refereeing a game that morning. And I got a text from my RIC. He's like, hey, I'm at this rink. Please come see me. I'll be here all day. And I was like, oh, no, like a call went wrong in a game that I did, or he owes me money, something like that.
Okay. And
I got there, and he's like, Matt, let's go outside for a sec. So he told me that he selected me to work the Atlantic Championship. And I was ecstatic. Like, at such a young age, at 16, when you hear that, it's something else. And I was one of the youngest officials there, so I felt very timid going into that tournament. I had something to prove being the youngest one there, and it helps you. Like, even though there's a lot of pressure on your shoulders, you just got to pick yourself up and go with what you got. And that's what I did throughout that tournament. And I showed the RICs and the scouts in the stands that selected me to work the game that I deserved to be there.
So obviously you did pretty good if you got to the gold medal game. Can you still kind of remember that game at all? Is that something that you take away some memories from that tournament?
It was a close game. If I remember correctly, it was within one goal going into the third, and I was shaking like I was thinking, oh no, we're going to have overtime. It's going to be one of those goals scored in the last 2 minutes of the third. I don't think it ended up being that outcome, if I remember correctly, but I was definitely nervous that morning driving to the rink.
Yeah, so you worked through that. So you got to Bantam AAA.
Yes. Back
in Nova Scotia. Then you made the decision to come here. So was that a tough decision from a referee point of view, where you work your way up through the ranks there, and you need to kind of adjust to a new setting?
It's definitely different. I was lucky enough to have some contacts back home that gave me really good references before I came here to Ottawa. Got in touch with Mike Ostrom, who was the RIC of District B at the time, and Mike was really accommodating with welcoming me into the district. Definitely made myself have to prove like that I'm able to do competitive hockey, especially in a big city like Ottawa. And I'm still trying to do the same thing, but a lot of I've definitely been getting a lot of positive feedback this year doing the AA and AAA hockey, and I just got selected to work the finals for AAA this week, so I'm looking forward to the challenge that lies ahead.
So which AAA is that?
This will be the Pee Wee AAA.
Right on.
Yeah.
So where's that happening?
The final series is here in Ottawa. It's between Ottawa 67s and Ottawa Myers. So
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
So, I mean, you're somebody that's obviously that has gone through the getting selected for these championship tournaments. Is there something about the way you officiate that's allowed you to kind of get these opportunities? Is there a certain thing that you think?
Well, personally, I think I always have something to improve on every game, and I always ask my supervisors what I can do differently to improve myself after every time they do a supervision. But I'd say like the feedback that I see a lot on the reports that they give me are confidence, good signals, positive skating aspects, penalty selection, consistency. I'd say a lot of those things go into creating like a good official, and I'd say those are the reasons why I have success in being noticed for these types of series and games.
Okay, but do you find like there's a big difference going from a smaller referee community, where you're from Nova Scotia to a big city like Ottawa? Was it a tough adjustment? Because obviously you're seeing new faces all the time. Is that different?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say back home I always see the same teams, the same kids, so you create that rapport with them, which is a good thing at times, but at bad times, or at sometimes it's a bad thing to deal with. But coming to Ottawa, I'd say once you get in and you get comfortable with the teams you see, the coaches you see, and also your officiating partners, I'd say it's just the same as refereeing in a small community. Like, I have adjusted accordingly, and I love officiating. I always see the same coaches. It's always a nice handshake before. Hey, how are you guys doing? How's your games going? And it's always good to see them around. I even work at a sports camp in the summer here at Carleton, so I see a lot of the same kids that I see on the ice, and they're always like, hey, you're like that ref that ref my game, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's probably me. So I enjoy it a lot. It's great.
Yeah. See, I think, it kind of comes without saying, but I think one of the best parts of officiating, like, I'm still pretty new to it, but like, I found one of the best parts is getting to know the guys. I mean, it's the camaraderie, right? Like, I know back in the Maritimes, I mean, like, I used to go to the Don Koharski school every summer.
Me too.
And you'd see the same guys, and you'd start to get to know everybody.
Yeah.
And it's cool. Like, so you went to those camps as well? Huh?
I did. I attended two Don Koharski camps in Moncton, back-to-back years, and I loved it. Like, in fact, there's one guy who I referee with here now, and I didn't know this at the time, but I attended one of the camps with him, and we just happened to be talking after one game last year, and he was like, yeah, I attended one of those camps. And I was like, oh, where are you from? And he said he's from Southern Ontario. I can't remember where to be specific, but he just happened to be in the Maritimes that week, and his parents signed him up. So we crossed paths at one point, but it was just one thing of how you don't always see like the same people, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's been pretty cool, and as sad as it is to say, I think even here, like when I do like junior games or something in Ottawa, sometimes the coaches will get to know who you are, and if there's a Maritime guy in the crew, usually they'll give you a little bit of an extra hard time. I've heard a few barbs there. I know there's one fellow referee here who's from Prince Edward Island.
Is that TJ?
That's TJ, and
yes,
I still remember one game we were doing the Carleton Ravens game here, and a certain coach made a remark about TJ being from PEI, and felt that he was probably under the presence of a certain sort of substance. And I'm not going to get into that, but it's funny though. You get to know these guys, and the Maritimers seem to get a tougher crack at the wheel.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's with that, but we seem to be a pretty friendly crew for the most part.
But it's pretty cool. Like, I mean, it's kind of interesting talking about the whole Maritime side of things, because like you probably know the world of officiating a lot better than I do. Like, you've seen it all. But I mean, it's cool to see. Like you look at the NHL ranks, and it's the amount of guys from the Maritimes. It's pretty.
There's quite a few.
There's quite a few, and I don't know if there's a reason why that happens to be like that.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I'd say a lot of it starts at the grassroots and the development programs that are put on by Hockey PEI, Hockey Nova Scotia, and Hockey New Brunswick. Like, compared to some provinces around Canada, not that I would know specifically, but the amount of talent that we put out in officials is just next to none. So it's good to see.
Yeah, and it's always something that I've found odd is, I mean, you look at if you just flick on a game on TV, there always seems to be a guy. I mean, geez, like I can list like who do you got? Like Gord Dwyer, Jean Hébert, Ghislain Hébert, Chris Lee, McIsaac, Tim Peel, McPherson.
Yep.
I mean, the list goes on, and it's amazing considering that it's a pretty tight roster. How many guys come from the Maritimes? I'd even say there's probably more referees than there are players.
Oh, absolutely. I'd say
in the
NHL,
NHL,
yeah.
which is sort of odd to think about, but
yeah.
I don't know. I was always kind of curious as to why that was. I mean, I think there's lots of great supervisors and camps, like you're saying, like programs, but I was always interested maybe it was a personality angle or maybe, the laid-back nature of Maritimers. I don't know.
Hey, you never know. That's probably always in the minds of supervisors when they look at guys from the Q or who are in the ranks for senior hockey.
Yeah. So I'm interested kind of like you're obviously somebody that's progressing pretty quickly through the ranks. Like, is there a kind of a vision that you see? Like, is there a goal that you try and work towards, getting seen, or just, focusing on what you need to do? I mean, what's your mindset kind of as you progress through the levels?
I think as officials, we always have short-term goals for a season, and then we always have long-term goals for the future. So I'd say for short-term goals would be progressing into junior next season. I'd really be interested in doing that, and I feel that I'm capable of doing that. And I'd say in the long term, definitely looking towards the CHL, whether it be out west or here in Ontario or out east again. But it's definitely going to take a lot of progression, a lot of time and effort, off-season training, all of that good stuff that goes into making a good official.
Yeah, and that's funny you mentioned like off-season training. I mean, it's something that even as players, it's sort of not a new addition, but I mean, like my dad used to play in the NHL back in the 80s, and he tells me this great story of him and a couple teammates in St. Louis and how, a lot of these guys wouldn't train that hard in the off-season. And there was one camp they came to where a couple of the guys were overweight. So what they did was it was a hot summer day in St. Louis, and a couple of the guys thought it'd be a good idea to crank up the heat all the way in their car.
Oh yeah.
And drive around the city for about 6 hours before the weigh-in. So they had to go weigh-in the next morning. So they sweat off about 20 pounds.
Oh my.
They go into the weigh-in at their target weight or whatever they had to come in as a season. Then I'm sure they're ready to pass out at this point. But they come in and they meet their weight, take back a bunch of water, and get back to that weight. But it's always funny. So coming back, like it's cool that even with officials now, you see such an emphasis on the off-season workouts and the strength conditioning. Is there a reason why you think that's such a big element now?
I think the biggest thing is that the game of hockey is it's getting so much faster than it used to be. The boys are bigger. You have Zdeno Chara, who's one big guy. And you have to think, if you're going in to break up a fight as a linesman, you have to be just as strong as he is or the equivalent, because there's no going back once you're in that fight. Like, if you're not ready to pull your muscle in that, then you're probably going to get injured. And I'd say that's a big reason why fitness is being so heavily stressed by the NHL. And of course, now it's working down into grassroots hockey, because I know it's being stressed at our meetings that we have in District B, as well as in the AA and AAA program that's here too.
Yeah. And it's I mean, we throw around the word off season, and it's amazing that there really isn't an off season anymore.
That's
maybe
right.
you're not reffing games, but you're still working. You're not taking time off. It's still very much you're actively engaged in pursuing refereeing, right?
Yeah, last summer was it was my first summer here in Ottawa, and I was officiating all summer, so there's no off season for me. I was training every day, and if I wasn't training, I was running or refereeing hockey. So I'd say last summer was a big turning point for me, but a lot of officials, I highly recommend finding a league that run summer hockey and getting involved in that, because you're skating at least 3 times a week, and it just your game. You'll see your game and your abilities and just your confidence go through the roof, because there's no other way. Like, you're getting ahead of other officials that aren't doing that throughout the summer, and if you see a career in officiating in the future, that's what you need to do. Yeah. So I'd say off season, it's going out the door, kind of, but definitely a big aspect is the whole officiating off season, and if you're not officiating, you're training for sure.
And now, is there something that did you incorporate certain types of training regimens into what you're doing? Is there certain points of emphasis that you felt were important to work on?
I say for me, it's not a lot of strength training. Like, I'm a pretty big guy myself, but the biggest thing was my cardio for sure. So I try my best to run between 5 and 7 kilometers every day. Shed a little bit of weight, which I was able to do. So it helped me this season. Biggest aspect I noticed was my skating, and definitely my cardio for sure. I know this summer it's going to be more focused on strength training, mainly in the legs, so that I can get faster with my skating, have better push-offs, like all of that stuff that comes along.
Yeah, no, and it does make a difference. Like, it's something that I've definitely worked into what I do as well, and you see the little differences, and even if it's just that half second quicker that you get to the net or something, it does make a big difference.
It makes the biggest difference, especially with how fast the game is going and how fast that puck can move.
Yeah. And it's amazing, because, geez, I mean, you look at the speed. I mean, you watch those old '80s game tapes, right? And it's just the guys are hooking and grabbing, and it's not the fastest game, right? It's still very skilled, but you look today, and there's the speed is really incredible, and I think that was part of the reason they have the 4 officials now.
Oh, I agree.
That speed of the game, right? So, it really is pretty amazing to watch now, right?
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And you see Connor McDavid just flying around the ice, and you have to think, how do those officials in the NHL compete with that, and thinking about, how do I get up to that caliber of speed? It's unreal.
And you think just how quick the game is too. I mean, infractions can be even quicker too. Let's say you have a guy like Connor McDavid busting down the wing, and there's a little bit of stick work there. If you don't have that foot speed to find that right angle, that right sight line, I think you might be in trouble, right?
You're always going to be in trouble if you don't have that right sight line. You're always missing out on something. And I agree. That's a big aspect, is the speed of the game these days.
Obviously, you're in a lot of minor hockey now. So would most of your games would be 3-man, or have you done a lot of 4-man as well?
I've done a bit of 4-man. Most of it's back home in Nova Scotia. Midget hockey leagues back home do 4-man, no matter what. So Midget House would be 4-man. Mm-hmm. Here in Ottawa, it's mainly 3-man. That's all I've been doing all year. Yeah. But I think it's slowly starting to change as the game changes and the speed changes. That people would like to start seeing 4-man.
Yeah, and it's. I'm a linesman pretty much. I don't know how to call a penalty to save my life unless it's too many men. But even then, it's hit and miss.
Won't hold it against you.
Oh, thanks, man. It's a Maritimer thing to do. But I'm just curious, as a guy who works predominantly in 3-man, do you see difficulties in adjusting to the 3-man system? I mean, as a linesman, it's pretty much the same. I mean, we have 2 referees to look at now. But I mean, do you see difficulties? Is it harder? Is it easier? I mean, what's kind of your look at? How do you look at it?
Are you talking about the aspect if I'm doing 4-man or if I'm doing 3-man system?
Yeah, going from 3-man to 4-man. You talk to some refs and they do 4-man. They say it's easier to see things, but then you talk to some of the old school referees who do 3-man. They say, I love being in control of that game, and I'm calling the game. How do you look at the difference there?
For sure, I'd say the old school guys. Not to point them out because they're older, but I'd say they have a little bit harder time adjusting to a 4-man system from 3. And I'd say the big reason is because a lot of things they don't stress in the clinic is having a hard eye and a soft eye. Hard eye being if you're in the zone, you're watching the play. If you're if you're the back eye and have the soft eye, you want to focus on the areas that the guy in the zone would not be focusing on. So I'd say a lot of guys are looking at the same play, and even though a guy is 90 feet away, he's calling a penalty that might be 5 feet away from the other referee. Mm-hmm. I'd say that gets them into trouble sometimes. Yeah. And unfortunately, it happens, and then the coach is on your back or a player's on your back. But everybody sees the game differently, and of course, consistency is different for everybody because we're all human. But I'd say the biggest thing is it's definitely like the calls that are made, because it can make or break a game with what somebody else sees compared to your other partner.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, again, I don't referee, but I hear a lot of the supervisors that come to our games that are talking to the referees, and sometimes that very situation will come up where you have a low guy that doesn't make a penalty call when the play is right in front of him, but the high guy will make the call. And it goes into that question of, maybe who has the better sight line, and also kind of like, even at, like, what's the most important thing? Is it getting the call right, or is it, the optics? I mean, like, sometimes that guy might make the right call, but it looks bad because, his partner didn't make it. I mean, like, how do you take a look at that?
At the end of the day, I think it's the mindset to always get the call right, and I think that's always been stressed to me from a young age, is like, if you get that call right, good on you, no matter who calls it. But I'd say the big thing is that if there's a penalty right in front of you and you're the end zone guy, but maybe you don't see it the same as the back guy, just for an example, a hook, you might be on the other side of the hooking infraction,
right,
and the back guy gets it. I'd say that's a little bit different. That's more justifiable.
Yeah.
But if you have a penalty such as a check from behind or something, a cross check, that if you're a low guy and you're near the play, you should be able to see that properly and have better optics than the guy who's 90 feet away might. So it's always hard to say, but I'd say the biggest thing these days is like to get the call right.
Yeah. And do you find it's tough? Because, I mean, sometimes you can obviously have two referees that have two different sort of ways they call a game.
That's right.
Is that tough to adjust to something like that, where you might have a one standard that's very rigid, and they might have a completely different standard? Is that tough to adjust to that?
I'd say it's tough to adjust, but it's one of those talks that you need to have before your game. Say, Jimmy, like, this is a game one of the playoffs, like, I want to set a good standard, and maybe he agrees and maybe he doesn't. So it's one of those talks that you need to have prior to the game, and not making the stuff up like as you go in the game. I'd say game prep it's a huge thing when you're refereeing a 4-man system, especially getting to know who your other official is.
Yeah. And is that something where you just, it comes with experience, you get to know a guy, or can you really figure that out by a pregame discussion? Is it kind of hit and miss a little bit?
I think it's a bit of a hit and miss, but it always hurts there's never so much thing as too much communication.
Yeah.
So I think that once you set that precedent note at the start of the game, like in the dressing room, that it might not make a difference, but the next time you're on the ice with that guy, you're going to have a better understanding of what they are, what their standard is, and they'll have a better understanding of what you call and what your standard is as well.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense, Matt. And I just wanted to segue a little bit, because in our previous podcast before with Cameron Fox, who you know pretty well.
I do, yep.
So we talked a little bit about kind of like the personality types and how you kind of use that to your advantage, or because you have some refs that are they like to chat with the coaches, or you have some guys that are very quiet. I mean, do you have you just basically used your personality and used that to your advantage? Have you changed the way you comport yourself on the ice? I mean, how does that all work together for you?
Yeah, for me, I'm very much like a social person. I don't interact with the coaches a lot. When I do, it's pregame, and I'll introduce myself. I'll tell them my name, and I'll say, if you have any questions, send your captain, and then I'll come over instead of yelling across the ice. I'd say my biggest social outreach is basically with the players. Like, they're the ones that they're shooting the puck all the time. You don't want the puck in your skates. You don't want the puck being shot at your head. So I'd say saying, "Hey, Smitty, heads up, I'm right here. I'd say that's a big communication thing. And for me, it makes a big difference in my game. The last probably 3 or 4 years, I've been using that to my advantage. And the players like it too. They'll come up to me and they'll be like, "Oh, thanks for the heads up. I almost shot it around the net. Appreciate it." So I'd say personality is a big thing. If you're a quiet type of individual, you might see more pucks come your way. It might not necessarily be your fault, but I'd say communication is very key.
And while even getting hit by a puck's obviously not a penalty unless they're really going for you. I mean, it's cool because you talk about that. I mean, a big part of our job is not necessarily just calling penalties, but it's preventing penalties from happening, right? Because if we don't have to get involved with the game, I think it helps the game a little bit more, right?
Oh, exactly. It makes the game flow just as well as if you weren't on the ice. So that's the way that we want to be.
And you find, because like, you're a Maritimer guy. I mean, we're Maritimers, and I find, when I go into a game and I'm chatting with the coach or the players or whatever, I try and use a little bit of humor.
Yes,
I try and keep it very light. I mean, do you kind of have the same, like, what's your attitude in chatting with the players?
I mean, I'm not one for having good comebacks or anything, but I try my best to throw some humor into it. If my linesman falls, I tell the linesman after the game that I was giving him a hard time to the players, but the players like it when you give a little bit of hard time to the other guys, not in a penalty aspect or washing off an offside or anything, but if they fall by accident or something like that, the players like that when you give the guys a hard time. So I can't complain about using that side of the humor of the game.
Well, I wipe out quite a bit, so I hope you'd be one of those referees that wouldn't be making fun of me that often. But
you're buying beers after the game, so I won't complain.
Hey, linesmen don't make very much money, man. That's not very nice of you, honestly.
Sorry about that.
But no, that's really cool. And I kind of wanted to jump in a little bit to a different angle. Like, I know we watch the pro game, and you see in the news all the time that there's always criticism of the referees nowadays, and it seems the big issue that. And we talked about this in the previous podcast is, you see like goalie interference is a big thing now. It seems like in the news every day there's something about the controversy surrounding that. And I'm wondering, as a guy who's, seen quite a bit, like, do you have a perspective on why that's such a big issue now?
Well, I'd say the media portrays a lot of what the public should think about officials. The NHL is trying to do away with that. They're telling coaches and players to not comment on how the goalie interference penalties are being called lately. And I think part of the reason is because maybe the NHL doesn't quite know what the standard is now. And I think it'll be really interesting to see where they go with it during the GM meetings this summer.
Do you know, like, because I look at it, and, I mean, goalie interference has always been kind of a controversial issue, but, like, now with the video review system, and it was supposed to take away a lot of these issues, right? But it seems like it's just blown up now. Do you know why that might be?
I'd say the big thing that is getting out of proportion is how it's called. Like I said earlier in the podcast, everybody has a different standard. And if you generate that standard just down to one person, like, for example, sending all goaltender interference plays to Toronto in the war room, then you have one standard and not 40 different standards for each guy that you have officiating in the NHL. Now, that's just my take on it because everybody sees the game differently. But I'd say the big thing is, like, express what was goaltender interference. Is a player knocking another player into your goalie? Is that goaltender interference? Is walking through the crease with your elbow up, hitting, like, making contact with the head? Is that goaltender interference?
Right.
Like, certain things like that.
But if you delegate it to, like, the head office in Toronto, like the War Room, is it tough for them too? Because it's not something as black and white as, a puck crossing a line or even a, distinct kicking motion, which you don't see a lot of anymore. But is that something where it's tough to be that situation room guy and look at a play like, maybe this player was pushed in, maybe he didn't really try and let up, like, when you're on the ice, you have a sense of that maybe a little bit. Is that tough for them, you think?
I think it is, and part of it is you need to have the referee involved in that situation. Like, you see the boys on with their headphones on communicating with Toronto, and I think it's a little bit of give and take. Like, if I'm on the ice and I'm telling the guys in Toronto, hey, like, I saw this, I felt that he did this, like, push the player in. You have to... It's a little bit give and take by both sides, but like I said, it'll be really interesting to see where the NHL goes with this, and of course the officiating association as well, because it's a big controversy right now.
Okay, so I just wanted to tie it all up together here towards the end. You're from the Maritimes. We obviously know our maritime officials pretty well, and obviously your dad was an official, even continues to be, but. Do you have any specific role models that you had growing up that you still look to today that you kind of help to try and base your game off of? Are you a Wes McCauley guy, or are you
definitely a big fan of Wes McCauley. He brings a flair to the game, but I'm more of like a hometown, like, grown boy, and I appreciate, like, the guys who have helped me along the way, guys like Ben LaRouche, Mark Gordon, Mike Hobble, Scott McKeegan. Those are all local guys who who have been officiating with me for a long time. So I really appreciate where they've taken me with my game. And I'd say NHL wise, once again, homegrown boys, John McIsaac, Matt McPherson. I attended Don Koharski camps like I said earlier, and they were there. They always knew my name. They knew I was from Nova Scotia. And when I attended the officiating camp at St. FX University in 2016 for Hockey Nova Scotia, once again, Matt, first guy out of the room. Matt, how are you? How's it going? How's school? So I'm definitely a homegrown boy, but those are the guys that I looked up to from a young age, and they're still guys I look back on, and I really appreciate what they've done for my game for sure.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool. I mean, that can make a big difference. I know, back in Moncton, where I'm from, I mean, Tim Skinner was always the guy. I don't know if you're familiar with Tim.
I've heard his name, yeah.
But he was always the guy that really helps push you through and gives you such great mentorship. And even though I'm not there, he was definitely a big reason why I was able to kind of move up a little bit. So, I mean, is that something that you think is important to kind of give back what you get? Is that sort of something you see yourself down the road, maybe in 20 years being one of those kind of guys that helps out? Or
I'd love to be that guy in 20 years and seeing younger officials progress. It makes you feel good on the inside, seeing those young guys that move up fast. I'm sure you can appreciate this, Mr. Skinner, seeing you move up to do AHL and university hockey. So I know in 20 years, if I'm still involved in the game of hockey, that I'd give back just as much as that it has given to me.
Yeah, and so just kind of ending up here, I mean, you've had experience with lots of different angles of the game. I mean, we're talking about, mentors and stuff. Is there something that you like? Is there a certain type of mentor or supervisor that, that gives certain type of feedback that you really appreciate? Is there a certain type of if you're a supervisor going into a rink, is there something that you like to see from them specifically? I mean, is there something that you like to see in that angle?
Specifically for me, because I'm one who's very hard on myself. I'm just as much as a critic of myself than anybody else. But I love a supervisor who comes in and tells you exactly how it is. I don't want it to be sugar-coated. I want to improve in the game and move up just as much as anybody else. Yeah. So I want that upper advantage. I want to know what I can improve on right away. I don't want cupcake sugar-coated, cherry on top. I want it cut and dry, what I did wrong and what I did right, and what can improve my game more.
And do you think that's something that comes with a personality type? I mean, is that going to work for every referee that you encounter? Maybe some guys, is it going to be a little tougher to swallow? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say from my point of supervising, with the younger kids, you can't tell them cut and dry exactly what they need to do. You need to guide them in a way that's going to help them move up. Yeah. And then I'd say once you get to do higher level hockey, that you have to be a little bit tougher in the spine, and you have to give your honest feedback and not hold back. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to playoff time, playoff assignments are handed out based on how your supervisions went during the regular season, and right. I think that's exactly how it should be. It should be clear, cut, and dry when you're a little bit older and you're able to take criticism better.
So I think that's a great note. So supervisors out there, and if you have the right guy, make sure you're very blunt and don't beat around the bush. Get your point across and make sure they can really improve. So, Matt, thanks again for coming on to the podcast. It's a real pleasure to have a fellow Maritimer out here helping us out. And obviously, Matt was also a referee of the week a couple weeks ago, so make sure you check out that post. And this will be launched soon. So, Matt, thanks again for coming out here.
Brandon, thank you so much for having me. And I'd just like to give a nice maritime shout-out to my mom and dad back home. Thanks for everything. And shout-out to my brother. You're a strong lad. Keep up with the powerlifting.
So thanks again, and tune in next week, and we'll make sure to give you another podcast. All right, so thanks a lot, and have a good one.